Order, order. I call Patrick Hurley to move the motion.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I am grateful for the opportunity to lead this debate, marking the 60th anniversary of the white paper that led to the founding of the Open University, originally called the University of the Air. It is worth pausing, I think, on that phrase for a moment, because even now, 60 years later, it still sounds faintly otherworldly, I think. Even now, with all of the electronic gizmos and gadgets that we have, and with the information whizzing around us constantly, a university of the air. Higher education broadcast direct into people's homes. Learning available not just to those who'd always had privilege, not just to the young or just to the affluent, and not only to those who followed a conventional academic route, but crucially, learning made available to ordinary working people, fitting study around jobs, families, and the realities of their lives. 60 years on, what once sounded ambitious, perhaps even eccentric to some, instead now looks visionary. And that's because it was visionary. It didn't begin as some sort of administrative reform dreamt up in Whitehall. No, this was first and foremost, Sir Desmond, this was a political project. Harold Wilson first floated the idea in 1963, seeing the potential of television and broadcasting to widen access to education in ways that had not previously seemed possible. But the person who really drove this project forward was his minister, Jenny Lee. There aren't many white papers that leave behind institutions still changing lives 6 decades later. But this one did. And it did so because Jenny Lee understood something important. There's always been a mismatch in this country. Potential is spread far more widely and far more equally than opportunity. In the mid-60s, the assumption was, it was still, that higher education belonged to a relatively narrow section of society. By all means.
Member for giving way and congratulate him on securing this debate. Just on the issue of the narrow cohort of people that would normally benefit, would you agree with me that lifelong learning is an essential component, particularly for young people from working class communities, many of whom do not take part in traditional higher education levels and can be and should be targeted in order to benefit not just now but for the generations to come?
I agree entirely with the member. I will come on to make very similar points myself in the speech to come, and I think that we are very much on the same page there. Yeah, by all means.
Thank you, Sir Desmond, and thank you to the member for giving way. Will the member join with me in recognising the Open University's role in pioneering modules, credits and credit transfers, which turned lifelong learning into a reality for so many adults in my North Down constituency, and in the acknowledgement that changes to funding in 2010 badly hit part-time and mature learners, and that the promise of the White Paper still depends on the choices that governments make on funding policies. Thank you.
I thank the member for his intervention. Funding is a huge issue here. The modular basis for Open University has been a real boon to people who find themselves unable, for whatever reason, to study in a traditional format, but funding is still a key concern. Back in the 60s, university was for young people. It was thought to be young people, usually at least middle class, usually full-time, usually following a fairly prescribed path. The thinking went that if you'd missed your opportunity at 18 or 21, then that was that. You'd had your chance. But Jenny Lee and the Wilson government as a whole challenged that assumption. They believed that education ought not to be reserved for those lucky enough to travel a conventional route through life. They believed people should have second chances, and third chances if they needed it, and fourth chances too. And crucially, she insisted there should be no lowering of standards and no second-class offer for those who've missed out the first time round. Perhaps the most radical thing of all was this: the Open University would be genuinely open. The White Paper made clear that people should be able to study irrespective of previous educational qualifications. In other words, you wouldn't be shut out of it just because you'd not done your A-levels. And on all these points, they were absolutely right, because the Open University has become one of the great success stories of modern Britain. Today, it's the largest university in the country. It's got around 125,000 students. Nearly a quarter of all part-time higher education students in this country study at the OU. It reaches every constituency, including my own in Southport, where there's around 135 people currently studying through the Open University. This is not some sort of niche institution sitting at the margins of education policy. It is instead one of the central pillars of lifelong learning in this country. Yeah.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and I am grateful to him for celebrating such a great Labour achievement, and a great achievement by a great Labour woman, Baroness Jenny Lee. Would he join me in congratulating the University and underlining the importance for people like me, who I was looking after 4 children, and I was able to do a Masters at Open University spread out over 3 years with some really cutting-edge modules, which I still rely on now, because the Open University opens up education for people from all backgrounds, home-based and flexible, and with family responsibilities too.
I'm more than happy to commend Baroness Jenny Lee, more than happy as well to celebrate the success of herself and countless thousands of others in studying around the real lives that we all lead. So yes, definitely. And one of the reasons the Open University works is precisely because it understands something that many higher education institutions still struggle with. Life is not linear. People don't all move neatly from school to university to career to retirement in a straight line. Our lives are messier than that. People leave school without confidence. People drift into jobs and later discover different ambitions. They become parents, they care for relatives, they lose jobs, their health changes. Sometimes at 35 or 45 or 55, they just decide they want to try something new in their lives. The original White Paper understood this too. It explicitly talked about flexibility. It recognised that some learners would move quickly and others slowly, depending on the realities of their lives. And the Open University says something very simple to people in those circumstances. It is not too late. It is never too late. I should probably declare an interest at this point, because I wouldn't be standing here in Westminster Hall this afternoon without the Open University. I didn't come through the conventional route into higher education. I left school without much expectation that university was really for people like me. For most of my life, I'd worked in fairly ordinary, fairly low-paid jobs. For instance, I sold Magic Tree air fresheners to petrol stations. I spent a decade working in a call centre for an insurance company. I spent a few soul-destroying months working for a debt collector before I could take no more and quit to go back on the dole. And like many people, I found that if you lacked qualifications, there were doors that simply remained shut to you no matter how hard you tried. The Open University changed all of that for me. Not in some sort of dramatic overnight fashion, like you might see in a television drama. It was hard work. It meant studying in the evenings, at weekends, on the bus to work, on the bus home from work. And to be honest, probably sometimes during work if the boss wasn't looking. I was doing assignments when other members of the family were watching television or going out and getting on with their lives. But it made something possible to me that would otherwise not have been possible. It allowed me the ability to learn around my life. And I know from speaking to other OU students over the years that my story is far from unusual. There are hundreds of thousands of us out there who've rebuilt confidence, changed career, retrained, or simply proved something to ourselves because somebody somewhere 60 years ago had the foresight to build an institution that's flexible enough to meet people where they already are. There's also something deeply embedded in the labour movement around all this, because the Open University, it sits in a much longer tradition of working class people organising to educate ourselves and improve our circumstances. Long before most people had access to university, we had mechanics institutes, miners' libraries, mutual improvement societies, trade union reading rooms, university extension programmes. We had the Workers' Educational Association. Working class people have always valued education. We've always valued hard work. We've always valued making something of ourselves. The nonsense about a lack of aspiration that you sometimes hear from the assembled ranks of the privileged has never been true. The problem was never aspiration. The problem was access. In many ways, the University of the Air was the modern expression of that Victorian-era working-class tradition, the belief that education should not stop even when life gets complicated. That approach matters now more than ever. We live in a country where people are likely to work for longer. They change careers more often. They need to retrain repeatedly. We're also living through profound economic change, automation, artificial intelligence, changing labour markets, and an ageing population. We simply cannot operate on the assumption that education happens only once, in your late teens or your early 20s, and then stops. Because frankly, that never made sense, and it certainly doesn't make sense anymore. If we're serious about economic growth, if we're serious about improving productivity and helping people back into good work, then lifelong learning has to move from being a worthy aspiration to something much closer to the centre of how we think about our economy. As someone who's spent a lot of time since coming into this place working in the areas of employment, skills and economic inactivity, I think we sometimes underestimate the role that education plays in building people's confidence as much as their competence. Often, people aren't just missing qualifications, they're missing confidence that they're capable of more. Adult education changes that. It changed it for me. To be frank, I've forgotten quite a lot of the stuff I was actually taught during my time at the Open University. I sometimes need a primer on the exact details of the theoretical framework underpinning the long-run Phillips curve. And when I reread my master's thesis like I did a few years ago, I managed to surprise myself with how much I agreed with my own conclusions around the intersection between liberty and unequal power relations. But what I will never forget is that moment back in December of 2010, because that was the moment when I got my undergraduate result. It felt like validation, and it was a confidence boost that's never left me. But in amongst the successes and the congratulations, we should also be honest about the challenges.
On that point, would my honourable friend give way?
I will.
Thank you, Chair. My honourable friend for Southport is really powerfully speaking about his story and his experience to higher education. Young people from advantaged backgrounds or more affluent backgrounds are still much more likely to enter higher education than their less advantaged peers. Socioeconomic background, or what we more commonly call as class, working class, is still the strongest predictor of university attendance. Would my honourable friend agree with me that the mission at the heart of the 1966 White Paper to expand higher education access to spread opportunity is just as relevant today as it was then?
Definitely. I think it's, if anything, even more important in 2026 with all of the challenges that we see around us. Like I say, we should be honest about the challenges that we see. Despite the success of institutions like the Open University, adult participation in higher education has fallen over the last decade. Too often the system still feels designed around the traditional undergraduate who's left school at 18, rather than the parent in their 30s or 40s, the worker retraining after redundancy, or the person managing a long-term ill health condition while trying to rebuild their future. And yet, mature students are not some small minority. More than a third of undergraduate entrants are mature learners. This is already a major part of our higher education system, whether we recognise it fully or not. And that's why I welcome the broad direction of travel on lifelong learning and more flexible provision that the government is pursuing. The principle is right. People should be able to access education throughout their lives and in ways that fit around work and family. But it remains true that implementation and delivery matter as well. If lifelong learning is genuinely to continue to work, then people need a system they can understand and easily navigate. The funding regime needs to feel straightforward, and it needs to feel fair. Flexible provision has to be properly supported. Employers need to be a part of the conversation. And frankly, we need many more people just to know that these opportunities exist, because too many adults still assume that higher education is simply not for people like them. I'd ask the Minister to reflect on the role that institutions like the Open University can play in regions like mine. One of its great strengths is that people do not have to leave their communities to access the opportunities available to them. That matters in places which have too often watched talent drain away, like the region that I'm from. Somebody in Southport or St Helens, in Birkenhead or Bootle, should not necessarily have to move away from their hometown to improve their prospects. The Open University allows people to build skills while remaining rooted in the places that they love and that they want to contribute to. That strikes me as important, not just educationally, but economically and socially as well. I'm proud that this Labour government is acting true to the founding vision of the Open University. The lifelong learning entitlement represents a major step forward. It's transforming the student finance system to support flexible modular learning across people's lives. And for the first time, individuals will be able to access funding for both traditional degrees and shorter courses, retraining and skills development when they need it throughout their careers. And it's fitting that this reform builds directly on the principles pioneered by the Open University almost 60 years ago. The OU's expertise in modular flexible provision will be vital in making the lifelong learning entitlement a success. But we must do more. We must ensure that part-time provision is properly funded and properly supported. We must raise awareness so that more people know these opportunities exist. And we must ensure that lifelong learning is embedded across government. Yes, in education policy, but also in economic, employment and regional growth strategies as well. So as we mark 60 years since the White Paper, I think we should all do two things. First, we should celebrate one of the most genuinely radical and successful achievements, not just of Harold Wilson's government, but of every Labour government. An institution built on the belief that intelligence is not confined to one class, one place, or one stage of life. And secondly, we should remember that the argument that Jenny Lee made in 1966 is not yet finished, because the central question remains exactly the same as it ever did. What do we do with potential that has not yet had its chance? For millions of people, the Open University has represented confidence, dignity, and a second opportunity. I know that because in my own case, it changed the direction of my own life. And if for no other reason, I believe the vision behind the University of the Air deserves not simply our admiration, but also our continued support.
Minister.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would like to start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Southport, on securing this very timely debate and on the characteristically thoughtful case he has made in this debate today. I'd also like to credit the honourable member for South Antrim, a graduate of the Open University himself, who reminded us all of the analogue age of VCRs and the magic of Sir David Attenborough. I'd also like to thank the honourable member for Strangford, highlighting the genuine inclusivity of the Open University from its inception. He's right also to highlight the importance of prisoner education, whilst it's not something that sits within my area of responsibility. It's something I'm very passionate about, and I believe that the Open University and other providers have got a really important role to play, given the captive nature of the audience and the chance for prison to be a genuine chance to turn one's life around. Regarding the question specifically on UCAS, to answer this before turning on to the wider debate, the Open University chooses to manage applications directly, partly because of the need for flexibility beyond the normal academic cycle. So that's something that the Open University chooses to do themselves, but information about OU courses, including modular courses, is available on the UCAS website. And I'm keen, Sir Desmond, not to get drawn too far away from the Open University topic, but to respond in short to my honourable friend, the opposition spokesperson's issues regarding Level 7 apprenticeships. This is an area, I think, simply of some disagreement on policy about where the resources that sit behind the apprenticeship, now skills and growth levy, should rest. And I'm really keen, as is the Education Secretary, for those resources to be targeted very much at those who might not have taken a university path, and for those entry-level apprenticeship routes to be funded to the max. And that's why that policy decision was made. And I stand by it and believe it's the right one on balance for the use of resource. My honourable friend for Southport speaks in this debate not just as an advocate for lifelong learning, but as living proof of its potential. As he has spoken about movingly, his example is of someone who enrolled with the OU at the age of 30 and 5 years later emerged with both an undergraduate degree and a master's to their name. That, for me, is the Open University's mission in a nutshell. Not a makeshift second chance, but a genuine world-class route to opportunity for someone who wasn't on an academic pathway at the age of 18. And that is why his advocacy carries such weight. In Southport, he has carried that conviction into the community, at the heart of his constituency, championing the Learning Festival that took place in the town last year, and being a strong advocate for improving educational opportunities more broadly. As someone who's lobbied me many times about school buildings, I can attest to that. As my honourable friend explained, 60 years ago this February coming, another Labour minister, Jenny Lee, published the White Paper, A University of the Air. She did so in the face of immense scepticism. Whitehall was snooty, the press was cynical, and many of the establishment argued that the money should be spent elsewhere. But Jenny Lee was, in Harold Wilson's words, a tigress. At a famous cabinet meeting at Chequers, just before the 1966 election, she argued that while the National Health Service was the greatest creation of the post-war Labour government, the University of the Air would make, in her words, just as much difference to the country. The White Paper made a radical argument that higher education should be open to all, regardless of background or prior qualifications, that learning should be flexible, rigorous and lifelong, and that new technology would carry academic excellence far beyond the walls of traditional institutions. Jenny Lee won that argument, and 60 years on, every part of that vision, open access, flexibility, technology in service of excellence, reads less like history and more like a description of the task that sits in front of us today. The Open University, the institution founded as a consequence of that White Paper, is today the largest academic institution in the UK. with students in all 650 parliamentary constituencies. Since 1969, it has taught more than 2.5 million students worldwide. 3/4 of its undergraduates arrive with no previous higher education qualifications. The open door that Jenny Lee promised is still open. In the last 5 years alone, more than 15,000 people who began studying without any A-levels have earned higher education qualifications through the Open University. 2/3 of its students are working whilst they study, learning that fits around life, not the other way around. And the OU was never second best. 82% of its research impact is rated world-leading or internationally excellent at the last assessment, and last year it was awarded gold, the highest ranking in the Teaching Excellence Framework. Gladly give way.
The Open University has done, we all recognise it in this, and I know the Minister recognises it as well, is the fact that it reaches out to those who are perhaps isolated, those who are very much on their own, those who are lonely. It gives them an opportunity to focus their attention upon a degree and an opportunity, and thereby give them hope for the future. It's maybe underestimated sometimes, but it's very, very critical.
I completely agree, and it's why I'll turn now to the government's actions, which I think in many ways will take the Open University through to its next chapter, so that those opportunities are spread even more across our great country. Last October, we published the Post-16 Education and Skills White Paper. There is a powerful alignment between the Open University's mission to widen access and our own vision set out in that white paper for a world-leading skills system that breaks down barriers to opportunity. This strategy is the blueprint for delivering our new target for 2/3 of young people to be participating in higher level learning, academic, technical or apprenticeships. We are determined to break the damaging link between background and success, and we want more people from all backgrounds to be able to access higher education as part of that. As part of these reforms, the lifelong learning entitlement, which is one of those policies that I'm very pleased to say we are continuing from the previous government, and it has cross-party support, and rightfully so, represents one of the most significant student finance reforms in a generation. For the first time, it establishes a single flexible funding system covering levels 4 to 6 across further and higher education, enabling people to learn, upskill and retrain throughout their working lives. The rationale for it is clear. More than 1/3 of vacancies go unfilled due to skills shortages, and around 80% of the 2030 workforce are already in employment. However, the current system was largely designed for younger, full-time students and lacks the flexibility that adults in work need. The LLE will expand access to higher quality, flexible education and training, promote learner mobility, and ensure providers can respond to the needs of learners, employers and the wider economy. 60 years ago, a white paper of just a few pages was dismissed as vague, insubstantial and impractical. Today, the institution it created has taught more than 2 million people, among them my honourable friend, the member for Southport. That is the test Jenny Lee set us, not whether an idea is convenient, but whether it changes lives. She insisted there could be no question of offering students a makeshift project inferior in quality to other universities. 60 years on, that standard still binds us. From January next year, for the first time, funding will follow the learner, module by module, at any stage of life. And our ambition that 2/3 of young people reach higher level learning is matched by an entitlement that lasts to 60, because opportunity should not have a closing date. Jenny Lee's revolution was to say that the door to education should never close behind you. The task of the next 60 years is to hold that door open wider still in Southport and in every community like it. When our learners thrive, our country thrives. Thank you.
With your indulgence, Chair, I will touch just on the one topic that's been raised by a number of members, which is on funding. And the way I'll touch on this is by an anecdote in relation to how I paid for my Open University fees. When I studied at the OU, the modules were around £700 each. Now, even that was too expensive for me. And it wasn't until I realised that I could pay for my modules using Tesco club card vouchers that I finally took the plunge and enrolled. Because the choice is this. The booklet from Tesco would come through the post every few months, and you'd have an option of paying 50% off your Pizza Express bill, or get some free cinema tickets, or potentially transform my life through further education and higher education. And Sir Desmond, given that context, it was no choice at all. It was obvious what I should do. Funding is never easy. But in that context, I think we all now need to redouble our efforts to ensure that the principle that the OU was founded under, which is to make sure that education is affordable and accessible to all, holds true, not just for the last 60 years, but for the next 60 years too. Thank you.